The Midnight Train, a Love Story. Chapter 1, The First Encounter. It was a chilly autumn night, and the station was nearly deserted. Amelia, a woman in her late 40s, boarded the midnight train to a city far away. She was running from a painful past, dressed in a soft woolen coat that hugged her slender frame, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Her dark hair fell in waves, slightly tousled from the wind, and her brown eyes, filled with a quiet sadness, flickered under the station's dim lights. She clutched a worn leather journal, her only companion on this lonely trip. Across the platform, a man named Wilson stepped onto the train. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength about him. His deep-set blue eyes scanned the near-empty train as he adjusted the collar of his black overcoat. He, too, was on a journey, not just to another city, but toward a life he hadn't yet figured out. His life had been full of transitions from work to relationships, yet none of them had given him the sense of fulfillment he sought. As the train rattled out of the station and into the night, Wilson and Amelia found themselves seated across from one another. It wasn't planned, but fate had a way of orchestrating such moments. Their eyes met briefly, a connection sparked, and both felt the unspoken energy between them. Chapter 2. The conversation begins. The train's rhythmic hum filled the silence as both tried to find a sense of comfort. Amelia glanced out the window, watching the moonlight flicker over the passing landscapes. Wilson noticed the worn leather journal she was holding. His curiosity piqued. "That journal looks like it has a lot of stories," he said, his voice deep and warm. Amelia looked up, startled at first, but found his gaze sincere.
"It's more like a collection of thoughts than stories,"
she replied, her voice soft but carrying the weight of her words. He smiled, leaning back slightly. Sometimes thoughts are the most powerful stories. This simple exchange broke the ice between them. Soon, the quiet of the train car gave way to laughter and soft conversation. Amelia shared snippets of her life, how she had been an artist once but had lost her way after a series of heartbreaks. Wilson, in turn, spoke of his restless spirit, of travels that never seemed to lead him to the peace he craved. As the hours passed, their connection deepened. They spoke about dreams, fears, and places they wished to visit, as if they had known each other for far longer than the few hours they'd spent together. There was something undeniable between them, an understanding, a bond that neither could explain but neither wanted to question. Chapter 3. A Moment of Silence. The train made a brief stop at a small, unremarkable station. The cold night air filtered into the car, and for the first time since they started talking, both fell silent. The world outside was still, save for the rustling trees and the soft hoot of an owl in the distance. It was as if the world had paused just for them. Wilson leaned slightly forward, his eyes catching the moonlight. "Do you ever feel like you're running away from something, but you don't know what it is?" Amelia nodded, her heart heavy with memories she wasn't ready to share.
"All the time,"
she whispered. He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a profound sense of comfort and connection. Neither of them said a word, but in that moment they understood each other more deeply than words could ever convey. The train jolted back into motion and their journey resumed. But now the silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of their unspoken emotions. Chapter 4. The Last Stop. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the train approached its final destination. Both Amelia and Wilson knew that their time together was coming to an end, but neither wanted to face it. "I don't know where I'm headed after this," Wilson admitted as the train began to slow down. "But I know that this journey meant something." Amelia smiled softly, her heart aching with the thought of leaving.
Maybe we're meant to meet again."
They stood together as the train came to a stop. The city before them was bustling, already awake with the energy of a new day. People rushed past them, but the world felt still for just a moment longer. Wilson looked at her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Until we meet again." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes.
"Until then."
With one last glance, they parted ways. Amelia walked toward the city, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Wilson stood on the platform watching her disappear into the crowd, knowing that their paths would cross again, whether by fate or by choice. Epilogue: The Reunion. Months passed and both Wilson and Amelia continued their journeys, but they couldn't shake the memory of the midnight train, of that one night that had changed everything. One evening, under the flicker of New York City streetlights, Amelia found herself in a small cafe, lost in thought. As she sipped her coffee, the door opened, and there he was, Wilson, as if fate had led him right back to her. Their eyes met across the room, and this time neither of them had to say a word. The journey that had started on that midnight train had brought them together once more, and now they were ready to continue it, this time side by side.